The coffee cup trembled slightly in her weathered hands as Sarah Martinez wiped down table 7 for the third time that morning. The diner's regulars barely noticed the quiet woman in the faded uniform, just another invisible face serving their breakfast. But when the masked gunman burst through the glass doors, screaming threats and waving weapons, something shifted in Sarah's eyes. The tremor in her hands vanished, her shoulders squared, and in that split second, 20 years of Delta Force training awakened from its slumber. The customers who had ignored her for months were about to discover that their unassuming waitress was one of the most lethal soldiers America had ever produced. Sarah Martinez had perfected the art of being invisible. At 52, she moved through Murphy's diner like a ghost, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates while conversations flowed around her as if she weren't there. The morning rush brought its usual crowd, construction workers grabbing quick breakfasts, office employees scrolling through phones, retirees solving the world's problems over scrambled eggs. None of them really saw her. To them, she was just part of the furniture, another worn fixture in a place that time seemed to have forgotten. But Sarah saw everything. Years of training had taught her to catalog details others missed, the way Jake Thompson always sat facing the door, his hand unconsciously reaching for a weapon that wasn't there, telling her he was former military too. The nervous businessman who counted his change 3 times, suggesting financial stress. The teenager who flinched whenever anyone raised their voice, carrying trauma Sarah recognized all too well. These observations were automatic now, muscle memory from a life she'd left behind. The irony wasn't lost on her. 23 years ago, she'd been one of only 12 women selected for Delta Force train. She'd earned her place through sheer determination, outperforming men twice her size in combat scenarios that would break most people's spirits. Operation Desert Storm, Kosovo, 3 tours in Afghanistan. Her service record read like a Hollywood screenplay. Master Sergeant Sarah Martinez had been a weapon honed to perfection, capable of neutralizing threats with surgical precision. Now she couldn't even get the respect of customers who complained when their eggs were too runny. The transition from warrior to civilian had been brutal. No amount of military training prepares you for the suffocating mundanity of everyday life, the way people dismiss you when you're no longer wearing a uniform that commands instant respect. The nightmares still came. Not from the battles she'd fought, but from the silence that followed, the deafening quiet of a life without purpose. Her hands bore the evidence of both lives, scars from shrapnel mixed with burns from hot coffee pots. Calluses from gripping assault rifles had softened to accommodate serving trays, but underneath the ordinary exterior, the warrior remained. Every morning, she still woke at 0500 hours, completed a modified PT routine in her cramped apartment, and maintained the mental discipline that had kept her alive in combat zones across 3 continents. Sarah's manager, Danny, treated her like she was slow. He'd speak loudly and slowly as if age had somehow damaged her hearing or comprehension. "Sarah, table 6 needs more coffee," he'd announce, waving his hands dramatically. She'd nod politely, swallow her pride, and complete the task with military efficiency that went completely unnoticed. The younger waitresses whispered about her, wondering why someone her age was still slinging hash instead of retired somewhere sunny. What they didn't know was that retirement had nearly killed her. The transition from active duty to civilian life had been a free fall into depression and purposelessness. The pension helped, but it wasn't enough to live on comfortably. More importantly, it wasn't enough to live for. She'd tried desk jobs, security work, even teaching at a community college. Nothing filled the void left by a career spent protecting others. The diner job had been a last resort, a way to pay bills while she figured out what came next. That was 3 years ago. She'd stopped figuring and started surviving, 1 shift at a time. The work was honest, if not particularly fulfilling. She served meals to people who barely acknowledged her existence, cleaned up their messes, and went home to an empty apartment where the silence pressed against her like a physical weight. But something was stirring in Sarah Martinez. Maybe it was the way Jake Thompson had started nodding to her, recognizing something familiar in her bearing. Maybe it was the increasing frequency of her combat dreams, as if her subconscious was preparing for something. Or maybe it was simply the accumulation of small humiliations building toward a breaking point where the warrior inside would demand recognition. She moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, pouring coffee before customers asked, anticipating needs before they were expressed. Her situational awareness remained sharp. She knew who was carrying weapons, who seemed agitated, where all the exits were located. These weren't conscious thoughts anymore. They were as natural as breathing. The sheep around her lived in blissful ignorance of the predators that walked among them. But Sarah's eyes never stopped scanning, never stopped assessing threats. The morning sun slanted through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Sarah wiped down the counter for the fourth time, her movements methodical and precise. In a few hours, the lunch crowd would arrive, bringing new faces and the same old dames. Dismissiveness. She'd serve their meals, clear their tables, and remain invisible to people who had no idea they were in the presence of American military elite. But invisibility, Sarah had learned long ago, could be a tactical advantage. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room was the one nobody bothered to notice. The first gunman kicked open the diner's glass door with such force that the bell above it shattered against the frame. Sarah was behind the counter, coffee pot in hand, when three masked figures stormed inside wielding military-grade assault rifles. Their movements were sloppy, unprofessional, clearly amateurs who'd watched too many action movies and thought they understood violence. The leader, a tall man in a ski mask, fired a round into the ceiling, sending plaster raining down on the terrified customers. "Everyone on the ground! Now!" he screamed, his voice cracking with nervous energy. "This is a robbery! Empty the register and nobody gets hurt!" The diner erupted in chaos. Office workers dove under tables, construction crews hit the floor, and the elderly couple in booth 3 clutched each other in terror. Danny, the manager, fumbled with shaking hands toward the register, his face pale as printer paper. But Sarah Martinez didn't move. 23 years of training had taken over, flooding her system with familiar calm. Her heart rate slowed, her breathing became controlled. The coffee pot in her hand transformed from kitchenware to potential weapon. She assessed the situation in seconds. 3 hostiles, poorly positioned, no tactical discipline. The leader was standing too close to the counter, well within her strike range. The second gunman had his back partially turned, focused on terrorizing customers rather than maintaining perimeter security. The third was blocking the rear exit, but had positioned himself where chairs and tables would impede his movement. Amateur hour. "You deaf lady." The leader swung his rifle toward Sarah, his finger loose on the trigger, another sign of poor training. "I said get on the ground." Sarah set the coffee pot down slowly, her movements deliberately non-threatening. "I heard you," she said quietly, her voice steady as granite. Inside her mind, muscle memory was awakening. Distance to target, 8 feet. Available weapons, coffee pot, kitchen knives, scalding coffee. Civilian casualties to minimize, 17. Time to neutralization, 30 seconds, maximum. "Danny, open the register," she said calmly, never taking her eyes off the lead gunman. Her manager's hands shook as he punched keys, the cash drawer sliding open with its familiar ding. The sound seemed to relax the robbers slightly. They thought they were in control. They had no idea they just walked into the domain of a woman who'd eliminated high-value targets in 3 different war zones. The leader stepped closer, emboldened by what he perceived as compliance. "That's more like it, Grandma. Maybe you're not as stupid as you look." His tactical error was fatal. He'd moved within arm's reach of someone trained to kill with her bare hands. Sarah's transformation was instant and devastating. Her right hand shot forward, fingers extended, striking the gunman's throat with surgical precision. As he gasped and staggered backward, she pivoted, grabbed the scalding coffee pot, and hurled its contents at the second attacker's face. His screams filled the diner as he clawed at his burning skin, his weapon clattering to the floor. The third gunman spun toward the commotion, but Sarah was already moving. She vaulted over the counter with fluid grace that defied her age, rolling behind cover as bullets splintered the wood where she'd been standing. The customer's terrified screams provided acoustic cover as she low-crawled toward the kitchen, her mind calculating angles and opportunities. Jake Thompson, the construction worker she'd correctly identified as former military, caught her eye and nodded. Without words, they communicated a plan. He'd create a distraction while she flanked. 20 years of civilian life melted away as Sarah became the weapon she'd always been. The remaining gunman was panicking now, swinging his rifle wildly between the cowering customers and the empty space where the waitress had vanished. "Where is she? Where'd she go?" His voice pitched higher with each word. Fear was setting in, the predator realizing he'd become prey. Sarah emerged from behind the coffee machine like a ghost, moving with the silent precision that had made her legendary among special operations units. Her hand closed around a carving knife, its weight familiar and comforting. The gunman never saw her coming. The blade found the nerve cluster in his wrist with anatomical accuracy, causing instant paralysis in his gun hand. As the weapon fell, Sarah's knee drove into his solar plexus, doubling him over. A precisely applied chokehold rendered him unconscious in seconds. The entire engagement had lasted less than 2 minutes. Silence fell over the diner like a blanket. Sarah stood among the 3 neutralized attackers, breathing steady, her waitress uniform rumpled, but her bearing unmistakably military. The customers stared at her with a mixture of awe and disbelief. This quiet woman who'd served their coffee for 3 years had just saved their lives with skills they never imagined she possessed. Jake Thompson was the first to speak. "Outstanding work, Sergeant." The title came naturally, recognizing what had always been there, hidden beneath the civilian facade. Sarah looked around the room at faces that would never see her as invisible again. Police sirens wailed in the distance, but the immediate threat was over. She'd protected the sheep just as she'd been trained to do. For the first time in years, Sarah Martinez felt truly alive. Danny approached her with shaking hands, his earlier condescension replaced by respectful amazement. "Sarah, I had no idea. You're a hero." She straightened her uniform and picked up a fallen coffee cup, her movements returning to their familiar efficiency. "No," she said quietly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I'm just a waitress who used to be a soldier." But everyone in that diner knew they'd witnessed something extraordinary. The invisible warrior had finally been seen. Sarah Martinez returned to work the next day, but everything had changed. The regular customers greeted her by name now, shaking her hand and thanking her for her service, both military and civilian. Local news stations wanted interviews, but she politely declined. Heroes, she believed, didn't need spotlights. The real victory wasn't in the takedown of 3 amateur criminals. It was in the moment she realized that her warrior spirit had never truly left. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to emerge. Whether serving coffee or neutralizing threats, Sarah Martinez was exactly where she belonged, protecting others and serving her community. The diner installed a small plaque by the register, "Served by Heroes." It wasn't much, but it was recognition that Sarah had carried inside herself all along. Sometimes the most powerful people are the ones you never see coming. If stories of everyday heroes and hidden warriors inspire you, subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable spirit of those who serve. These men and women walk among us every day, and their stories deserve to be told. Hit that subscribe button and honor their service by keeping their memories alive.